So I'm delighted this morning to be with David Kemp. David is one of the most in-demand planners that I know of, planning consultant. David, do you want to just explain a little bit about your background and why you're one of the most, you know, resourced planners that I know in my network? Lots of people contact you asking for advice. You speak at events on a regular basis. So just a little bit about yourself.
I've been working in planning and property for about 20 years, just over 20 years. My background is a bit mixed. I mean, I've been a surveyor, I've been a planning consultant. I've also qualified as a barrister and a solicitor, and I've worked for councils as well as for developers and landowners. So we do a lot of work within the practice. The DRK planning practice has been running for 10 years. And we do a lot of work for developers, particularly SME developers, all around the country, so not just in London and the Southeast. And we work on applications, appeals, lawful use, enforcement, a lot of strategy stuff as well, which is really helpful if you're an SME developer and you're just trying to get to grips with what's the best way forward, the best way to tackle things. We do a lot of sort of, it's very practical, very practically related stuff as well. Pretty much answering the main points and the main questions that developers really want answered these days, and particularly with the coronavirus going on as well.
So let's come into that a little bit more. So we're going to ask you three key questions. One is, what's the current state of play right now with the coronavirus, as you mentioned? And dig in a little bit deeper, because I noticed you mentioned about HMO planning is a lot trickier because the schools are off. It's almost like a school holiday. So just going in through the transport requirements and how you're getting around that particular issue, and what your feelings are going forward in terms of not how long it's going to be, but what are the next steps if it does go beyond, a month or two? Is there things which the government may introduce in terms of planning? And it's interesting you mentioned the surveying background as well, which I have to admit I wasn't aware of. I knew the legal background, but not the surveying background. And one of the major challenges is surveyors are generally not going to site anymore as well. Lots of desktop. Look, rather than me give too much information, you're the expert this morning. First of all, do you want to just explain how the planning process has changed? Has it really significantly changed as well?
Yeah, most of it's gone online, really. There's a lot more meetings being held online. Obviously, all meetings will have to be held online for now while the movement restrictions in place. And so just yesterday, for instance, we had a meeting online with the planning officer and the heritage officer. It's actually quite funny these days. You kind of get to see what their own homes look like. It's a bit like a tour around people's personal lives. So we had a meeting. It was to do with a knockdown and rebuild of a heritage building, which was in a conservation area. So it was interesting to see how they cope with the technology. Officers actually been used to working offline and sort of working online and working from home for some time. I mean, I used to be a legal officer and I used to work remotely. So they're used to the infrastructure. They've got it there. It's just that some of them are off sick, and some of them might be struggling with their own workload or with the technology. So,
and also possibly working from home every day of the week, and it's not quite the same scenario about working from home. It's working from home, being self-isolated completely in the same room. How do you create a structure in terms of your business?
Being disciplined, a lot of it as well. Now, the meeting actually went rather smoothly yesterday, apart from the Zoom call having to cancel out, after 40 minutes, that sort of stop on it. But generally, they work pretty well. The difficulty is that we can't do on-site meetings, and that won't just affect planning consultants. It affects other people involved in the planning process when applications have to go in. So you've got people like noise assessors. People have to assess the impact of noise from commercial premises on your residential development. You've also got people like traffic and highways consultants. Now, they can do some work by using online tools, but they can't do all their work online. So, for instance, where they have to do on-street parking surveys, where you have to count the number of car parking spaces that are available at certain times of the day. Now, that's very important sometimes. If you're doing change of use applications, you're increasing the number of units on the site. So for instance, you're converting a house to flats, or you're converting a house to an HMO or a large HMO. Sometimes you have to do this because you're trying to prove to the council that if there is going to be an increase in parking space as a result of your extra units on the site, then it's not going to be harmful to on-street highways conditions. So I think generally speaking, the point is there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of uncertainty, and people are trying their best to get as much as they possibly can get done using online tools. But the thing is that some offices and some departments still need surveys done. So for instance, if you want to get an application done, you might need a measured survey done, unless you can work from agent's drawings or something like that. In each case, if you're a developer, you need to speak quite early on to your architect who you're selecting about what they can do with the information that you've got, say from agency plans. You need to speak to your highways consultant about what information you think you can get away with at this point in time with the council, and submit what you can. So we don't know, and I can't tell you in every case whether or not any particular set of information is going to be enough to get you out of the starting blocks on a particular application. I don't think anybody can tell you that at the moment, because it's so fluid. Not even the officers really know how to deal with everything at the moment. So it's a case of trying to get as much done as you possibly can. And if you're in a situation where officers, or say the highways officer or an environmental officer, say, sorry, but we don't have enough information at this point in time to move your application forward, then what you might have to consider is whether or not you just go for a pre-application at this stage, because the requirements are a lot softer, they're a lot less strict, and you can get away with basically not providing very much information at all. And there's some reports that you can leave off as well. So you might have to consider that. And there is one important reason why you might do that at this stage. And that is because what you've got to remember, that at this point in time, it's not that there isn't demand in the system. It's not that there isn't a willingness to go forward with schemes. A lot of my clients do want to go forward with schemes. It's just that either they can't get on site because there's a movement restrictions in place, or more importantly, the cash is not flowing around the system. It's stopped. Okay, it's very different to the credit crunch back in 2008, 2009. Cash was still flowing around the system. There just wasn't very much of it at the time. So it's a case that cash has stopped moving around the system. So for instance, people can't rent out the serviced apartments if you're relying on an income from that. You might have tenants who can't go out to work at the moment, so they're having a problem with paying the rent to you. You may be on site and relying upon finance from a drawdown from your bank, but you can't get the drawdown because the bank can't get its valuer or its monitoring surveyor out because of the movement restrictions. So cash has stopped moving around the system. But when the movement restrictions start getting lifted, and we'll come on to when in a moment, what we will see is everybody probably looking to do all these things at the same time. I'm talking to clients of mine, other consultants, other developers, and we think that there's going to be bottlenecks in the system. Probably in about 6 months' time, when we're seeing life return back to normal. I think certainly from the beginning of September onwards, if not before, but probably from the beginning of September onwards at least, when the schools are supposed to be going back as well. And then there's a general sense that everything will be returning back to normal. So if you are dealing with officers at the moment, but you don't go forward in some way, say with a pre-application, then they're probably going to be deluged and under a lot more pressure. Then there's going to be a massive bottleneck in how applications move through the system with them at that point in time. So whatever you can do to get ahead of the system and get ahead of the curve, if you like, of what will happen later on is a good idea. So for instance, if you are on site and you probably run out of building materials because you've done as much as you can do at the moment, you need to be thinking about whether or not it would be a good idea to reserve your orders for new building materials for in a few months' time, say from September, and lock a date down with your suppliers. And so it's not just people who are supplying goods to sites. It's also about people who are supplying services to you as a developer. You might want to discuss what you can do, or as much as you can do, with your consultants, etc. now, but then lock in some time, plan in some time in their diary for them to then get on to dealing with the stuff that they can't do now, but at a later date, so that they give you priority and they give you that time later on, so that there's not a massive bottleneck for their time and for their services in any event. So that it's just it's a case of trying to, on the one hand, get as much done as you can now, but on the other hand, forward plan as much as you can as well.
So, David, we've looked at the issue of how long it's going to be. I just want to look forward thinking a little bit longer term. People talk about behavioral changes, and maybe it's a bit too early to talk about behavioral changes because literally we've only had a lockdown for 2 weeks, 15 days or something. So it's, maybe it's too early to talk about behavioral changes, but do you see any behavioral changes long term in planning because of the impact, or way too early?
Well, I think that there will certainly be opportunities available in the market afterwards. I can see that there will probably be opportunities with a lot of pubs, cafes and restaurants that were already under pressure. The town centres were already struggling, and that pressure is only going to be deepened by the current crisis. Difficult to tell how long it will take for that to settle. And the difficulty is that planning policy may need to catch up with the reality on the ground as well. It's not done that yet, but it may very well have to do that, because there will be an urgency now more than there ever was before to get ourselves back on our feet and get the local economies, get the local town centres going again. So there'll be opportunities there. Behavioural changes is a really interesting one, Brendan, because the two of us are probably, even for people who are relatively mobile in our jobs, we're at home. We're working all the time at home now. Now think about if you work for a company like Procter & Gamble, or if you work for a large pharmaceutical company, or a company that's or one of the big surveying companies, who they're used to having a big city or town centre presence and big offices. So some of these big landmark offices. From my experience, having been on that side of the fence many years ago, having worked for one of these surveying companies, a lot of the reason, in my opinion, my experience, that they hold these offices is partly because of the culture as well. And it comes from like the partners, the older partners, often feeling as if they need to keep that big centre presence in some of these centres as well. They operate these big offices. And what we might start to see is them realising that there might be cost savings and efficiencies for them long term in not needing such big offices, and that more of their staff can actually work remotely. They don't have to be in the office. They might use hot desking a lot more, not so much dedicated meeting space, and they might use online meetings a lot more as well. So there might be opportunities in the long term there for the rationalisation of a lot of office space to do a lot more mixed use schemes, a lot more co-living schemes in town centres as well. So if you are in a situation where you're ready to think strategically at this point in time, look 12 to 24 months down the line, you might want to be thinking about what the opportunities there may be and trying to position yourself, your investors, etc., with what opportunities there are locally. We'll see the same thing, I think, in the hospitality sector. We'll see a lot of hotels that might be looking to shift stock or rationalize stock as well. So I know that some clients of mine are looking in that direction at the moment and trying to open up a conversation with local hotel operators to see if there's the opportunity for redevelopment on some of those sites as well. So these are behavioural changes. They're having an impact on us individually as people working from our homes. But if you look at that on a grander scale, you can see how that might then feed into the local economy and the national economy, and then create structural changes in the economy that might then create opportunities in the longer term as well. And in most cases, obviously because cash has stopped flowing around the system, it's a good time to be looking for those opportunities, discussing those with your consultants. I'm doing that a lot with some of my clients at the moment. We are looking at opportunities, and I'm giving advice on online, obviously, on what those opportunities are and what we can do with them in the future. And then perhaps opening up a negotiation where you can quite early on with people who might currently be under pressure and be prepared to be flexible on terms. You might get deals done now that you might not be able to get done in 12 to 18 months. When sentiment hardens again, the economy may be returning back to normal. So now's a good time to start opening up those conversations, try to perhaps either do the deals or get options done on a subject to planning basis, ideally, or a subject to contract basis. So there are going to be opportunities there.
David, so the final question is, how can people connect with you? What's your preferred method of communication? Is it email? Is it LinkedIn, Facebook, website?
Well, you can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn and David Kemp, and under Facebook under DRK Planning. I have a website which is www.drkplanning.co.uk. My usual preferred method, a bit old fuddy-duddy like this, is email, but it's david@drkplanning.co.uk, david@drkplanning.co.uk. And I often use Instant Messenger as well, but obviously if you've got a site that you want me to look at, it's usually best to email me. And that email address again is david@drkplanning.co.uk.
David, I could be on here a lot longer, but I want to conserve the time. And I'm sure we will catch up possibly post-coronavirus, I hope, God willing. Maybe we'll catch up in a month's time. I'm just hoping the lockdown isn't for too long, but look, I've got no expertise in how long the lockdown is.
No, Brendan, I don't think even the public health officials know.
So look, I just want to say a massive thanks, and just a call out to the listeners as well. If there's anyone who you want me to interview, let me know. Just send me an email, just Facebook message me. So David, massive thanks this morning for joining me. Massive thanks to the listeners as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Cheers.